And people having access to digital access to the world at the end of the day, because today YouTube is going to teach you, well, this is my personal opinion, a lot more after your college or after your high school. It's going to add, sprinkle a lot of ideas in your mind. Digital in general.
Absolutely. And self-learning, right? The power of digital and the way that it has turned the head on conventional educational systems is amazing. But even digital requires for a certain amount of transfer of knowledge to happen. You used that example very rightly, by the way, before we started, is, look, that teacher who all of a sudden you gave a tablet to, right, had never ever learned how to transfer knowledge through the tablet-based ecosystem. Yeah. So the first step is actually to be able to take the teacher through that hardware and software before you even take it to the student. But, some institutions, individuals thought that, just by giving somebody a smartphone, that education was going to start happening immediately. Yes, to some extent it would. But if you really want it to be efficient and you want it to be sustainable long term, you have to look at the whole ecosystem versus just like a little.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and on today's date, could you elaborate on this? I was reading up on PwC, and there was a word that constantly came up, which is called trust. At the end of the day, people have to have that amount of trust to even go ahead and believe that the person who is giving, or an entity that's giving money and skill set, do we trust them or not? Because at the end of the day, trust is the biggest thing anywhere in the world. Yeah. Somebody coming over and presenting a pocket full of money, I'm just going to add this, a pocket full of money, and then we'll give you the skill set, and then go ahead and create. A lot of people will hesitate. Yeah. That trust is definitely going to be there. Yeah. How do you mitigate within that trust?
I'll use two words. And it's amazing that you picked this up, because if you ask me what is one of the most defining factors of the sector that we're in, is trust. We're essentially in so many ways in the business of trust, because why would someone think that my opinion is important if two things, intent and time. So one of them is intent, right? You've got to be very clear about what is your fundamental intent, the reason for why you're doing what you're doing. Yeah. And one example I'll use there, which is what has a positive movement, I think a lot more can be done, but positive movement that's happened in the private sector is, look, till 10 years, 15, 20 years ago, the only value that we would speak about in the private sector would be shareholder value. But shareholders are one stakeholder in a private system or even in a listed company, right? You've got employees, you've got customers, and you've got your shareholders, right? And then, of course, all your suppliers and all of that stuff. So the stakeholder group is much larger. Today, you'll hear a lot more about stakeholder capitalism versus shareholder capitalism. That means I'm not just looking at, is everybody making the return, right? And the return is not only about the shareholder, but it's about the entire group of stakeholders which make up a particular private system. So coming back to it, intent. Why is it that you do what you do? And the second is time, right? Any trust, whether it's to some extent two brothers, whether it's two business partners coming together, whether it's even within families, parents.
And or countries coming together.
All countries coming together, right? The interesting thing about trust is, in which everybody has heard often, to break it takes 2 seconds. To build it can take you years.
Forever.
Right? So I think there's a time equation which is associated with trust. If you don't, and one of the things that, at least in my own world, has been extremely important in the way that I've approached that same question is, typically when you looked at private sector philanthropy, it used to be very checkbook associated. I'd write a check, I'd give it to somebody came back to me with a report 6 months later.
A CSR.
Exactly. There's only one program, the Afghanistan program, and that I would have, of course, gone to unless there was the political instability which was on it a few years ago. But it's the only program out of all of our global humanitarian programs where I haven't gone and seen it before we started the program. And that's fundamental in terms of what I want to breed in how we do what we do in the not-for-profit space. It's about smelling, tasting, getting your hands dirty, and all the things that are required for you to understand context. If I don't understand the context of what that farmer that I keep speaking about in the Tarai is going through, and I cannot understand that context unless I smell it, I see it, I taste it, I feel it, right? If I don't understand that context, that person, that ecosystem has no reason to trust me. And the only way to do that is to go there as at the starting point. And then you begin to start scratching the surface on trust. And I've seen this happen in India, where, of course, I've done a majority of the work that I've done. We're beautiful, diverse society, right? So, I mean, what works in the North sometimes is not the same one-size-fits-all which will work in the East, right? Contexts are very different. And so you have to curate to that context. As soon as people see you spending time doing that, the little bubbling in the building of trust begins to happen. Like I said, to break it will be very easy, right? It takes very little to do that. But to build it and to sustain it, not just build it, but then you have to sustain it. To do that, that's a constant effort. That's a constant investment, not just of money, but of time.
Yeah.
And as you were quite rightly saying before we started today also, what are we most challenged with today? No matter the job you're in or the one that I'm in, right? Time. How do you give it enough time? So for me, by the way, one of the ways that I do that is that a lot of my site visits that I do into the field are on the weekend. And many people ask me, they're like, why don't you, don't you have anything better to do? Or don't you have anything more fun to do? And I said, look, the part of the reason that I do what I do is because I wouldn't call it fun, but what I consider meaningful in my life and what I consider, what I do professionally, there's a really fine line. And so for me, that line is blurred. When I'm in the field, in so many ways, I'm happiest.
Yeah.
So it's coming back to that point about self-interest, right? It makes me happy fundamentally. And the fact that that then has something meaningful that you're passing on to society, even better. Lucky me.
Thank you very much for watching us on YouTube. Make sure that you also listen to us on Spotify.